Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Good evening, Blackpool! Guess who's back? Back again. Because I'd been retired for 4 years. I thought it was all done. I'd spent 27 years of my life campaigning for us to leave the European Union. Everybody said, you're wasting your time. It will never happen. And that was why, after the Brexit vote, I was able to get up in the European Parliament and to say, when I came here all those years ago, I said I would lead a campaign to get Britain to leave the European Union, and you all laughed at me. Well, I said, you're not laughing now, are you? But there we were in Parliament Square. It was the 31st of January, 2020, and it was my honour to do the countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, way! And so that was it. I was done. It was all over. And then they made such a mess of it. They tried to overturn the vote. Do you remember? Yes. We've got some very sharp people in this audience, haven't we? Yes, Keir Starmer and others said we got it wrong. We, the morons, the plebs, we got it wrong, and we had to vote again. And Starmer was absolutely leading that charge. You're right to say so. So I came back out of retirement to set up the Brexit Party, and we smashed it in those European elections. Within 6 weeks, we got double the number of votes of the nearest party, and we got the resignation of possibly the worst Prime Minister in British history, though there's been some competition since. It's not wrong, is it? So we got the resignation of Theresa May. That was great news. And in came bouncy Boris. Bouncy Boris. Amazing, really, isn't it, to think that we could have had a Prime Minister who refused to say in public how many children he had because he simply didn't know. I mean, you know, not that I'm a Methodist preacher or anything like that, but that did seem pretty extraordinary. And then in 2019, and later in the year, in the December election, realising that Corbyn, who hated this country, the Liberal Democrats, who would sign us up to everything, could have won the election, I made the most difficult political decision of my life, and I stood aside in 320 seats, giving the Conservatives a free run, and they won an 80-seat majority, and we helped them. We significantly helped them. Since that date, they have literally betrayed the trust of 17.4 million people who voted for Brexit, the trust of those who put their faith in the Conservatives in 2019, the trust and to some extent the reputation of me, who gave them the benefit of the doubt. And you all know in Blackpool, one of the biggest reasons we voted Brexit, yes, of course it was about getting back control of our country. Of course it was about us, through a democratic system that our forebears fought for. And didn't the recent shenanigans in D-Day just sum up where the heart of this Prime Minister really is? We voted to get back control of our country. We voted to honour those that went before us and made the sacrifice so that we could be free. We voted so that our children and grandchildren could live in that freedom and liberty. But we voted to get back control of our borders. We voted to reduce mass immigration on a scale that these islands had never seen. And what have the Tories done? What have they done? They haven't done nothing. You're wrong about that. Go to the bottom of the class. They've made it worse. Go to the top of the class. Made it worse. Think about this, folks. Net migration into our country from Windrush right up until Tony Blair got elected ran at 40, 50,000 a year. And it ran for that for 50 years. And you could say, by the end of the last century, that we had the best levels of integration and assimilation of those who'd come from different countries and different cultures of any country in Europe. And I think it was something, actually, we were really rather proud of. Because we've always had, as a nation, big relationships around the rest of the world. In fact, we're the only people in the history of mankind who had an empire that turned into a Commonwealth club of friends. We even play sport with each other. We even like the Australians on good days, you know. Well, only when we're winning, obviously. And so we've always been very accepting. We've always been much more global than any other European country. Then Mr. Blair gets into power, opens the doors up in a way we've never seen before. And we're given the narrative through the mainstream media, the political parties, and our kids are told at school, all immigration is good. Control's not needed, and these bad dudes like Nigal Farage that question the numbers are really beyond the pale. But it was okay because in 2010, the Conservatives got elected. Call Me Dave became our Prime Minister. With his sidekick, that weirdo Osborne, you know. And they promised us in the manifesto they would reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. They promised it again in the 2015 manifesto. They'd reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. They promised us again in the 2017 manifesto. They would reduce net migration to tens of thousands a year. And in 2019, with support from me, they told the country they would massively reduce the numbers coming into our country. Blair and Brown net let in 2.7 million people. The Conservatives, since 2010, have now let in 4.3 million people. That's net. And in the last 2 years, net, it's about 1.5 million people. How big a breach of trust is that, with a promise of tens of thousands? How big a breach of trust is that, with those of us that voted to get back control of our borders? And that was why, with this snap election being called, and with very little time, I thought to begin with, it was impossible. How on earth could I come back, pick up the mantle of leading a political party, fight a constituency seat, travel all around the country and speak at events like this? I didn't think I had time to do it. But I changed my mind, because I realized going around and meeting people that I was being looked in the eye by the people's army of millions who'd supported me through the UKIP years, who'd supported me through the referendum, who'd supported me through the Brexit party. And they thought I was letting them down. Even though I've given most of my adult life to fighting these causes, they thought I was letting them down. And I came to the view that I can't let them down. And I decided, that's it. I'm coming out of retirement. I'm going to go back. I'm going to lead the party. And the lyrics, guess who's back? Back again, mega. Now, I've got to be honest with you, it's not my invention. It comes from Eminem. And they're now back in the charts on Spotify at number 40. So, please stream on Spotify Without You from Eminem and give them some support, because though I'm normally an original thinker, we did nick it and they deserve a bit of support. So please do that. Now, you'll have seen, in the last couple of days, you'll have seen a slew of opinion polls reflected on today's front pages. But these polls are not accurate. These polls are not correct, and here's why. The fieldwork for these polls was done, some of it, one of the polls, the More in Common poll yesterday, the fieldwork began on the 22nd of May. The Telegraph front page today, Savanta poll, The fieldwork began on the 4th of June. Well, unless I've got something wrong, we're on the eve of the equinox. It is now the 20th of June. And I would suggest to you that maybe, possibly, since I came back, we might be doing a little bit better than we were before. So, please ignore all of that. They say we'll get no seats. That's what those polls out yesterday suggested. Tonight there are 2 polls that have been issued, both of which had the field work done in the last 24 hours. Some up-to-date opinion polls. One shows us neck and neck with the Conservative Party on 19%. The other shows us ahead of the Conservative Party in one of those polls. And we might be trailing, and we are trailing the Conservatives in London and Scotland, but in the whole of the north of England, in the Midlands, in much of Eastern region, in parts of the South East, in most of England geographically, we are now the challengers to the Labour Party, and a vote. You hear all this guff from Rishi. Slippery Sunak, that's what I call him. Biggest spinner since Blair, he really is. I mean, I couldn't lie with a straight face like that. I mean, I really couldn't. You know, he said, oh, a vote for reform is a vote for Labour. No. No. In both of these seats in Blackpool, with Dan and Mark, who you saw earlier, and aren't they just great guys? Great guys. If you vote Conservative in Blackpool South, if you vote Conservative in Blackpool North, a Labour MP will win. But if you vote Reform in Blackpool North, if you vote Reform in Blackpool South, and don't waste your vote with the Conservatives, then I truly believe we can run close and even beat Labour in this town. I do. This campaign has real momentum. Now, I talked about opinion polls, about some of the polls that are saying we won't win any seats. So that's going to move me on to the subject of betting. It would appear that the modern-day Conservative Party is even more corrupt than we thought that it was. We have a former. Did you put money on as well? It's almost unbelievable that one of the National Campaign Director's wives bet on an early election, that a close bodyguard to Rishi Sunak bet on an early election, that a Member of Parliament, who was a private secretary, bet on a July the 4th election. And I've seen the statistics from Betfair, and the volume of traffic the day before the announcement went through the roof. We only know about 3 or 4 people. It's clear that on a mass scale, people knew when the election would be in the Conservative Party and used that information to corruptly try and make themselves some money. It tells us everything we need to know. Everything we need to know about this rotten political class. It's as if they're literally stealing the light bulbs on the way out of the building. It is a scandal, it is a disgrace, and we'll learn much more about it over the course of the coming days. And it shows why they are completely unfit for office in every single way. They have betrayed our trust, they have betrayed the country, they are corrupt, they've had more MPs suspended. I mean, they talk about our candidates saying a few dodgy things. I mean, how many perverts have they had to kick out over the course of the last 5 years? Not wrong, is it? You know, I mean. But a confession among my many vices, gambling is one. I love a bet, provided it's free and fair and not based on bent information. So I'll say this right now on the live stream. And by the way, we advertised this with less than 48 hours notice. We said there were 600 seats. They were gone for the following morning. We could have had thousands here tonight, literally thousands here tonight. So well done to all of you guys for getting in early. Watching us on the live stream will be huge numbers of people right now. But I want to point this comment to those that run the polling organisations in our country who say we'll get no seats. I'll bet you whatever you want, old son, that we're going to win seats in this election. And if you want to come back to me, I'm very, very happy to take your money. Not only are we going to win seats, but when people wake up to the fact, and they're waking up now, that this election is effectively over, the Conservatives are gone, they're doomed, they're on the way down, they're going to fall even further, they will lose the vast majority of their seats. And they will deserve to do so. And that Labour is massively ahead. And that unless we have a miracle with reform, Labour are going to win this election. But you see, here's the situation. No one can pretend the polls are close. No one can pretend the polls are tight. So we now give an opportunity to people to vote with their heart, to vote for what they really believe in. There are at least half of those who still say they vote Conservative that agree with us. They agree with a freeze on the overall numbers of immigration coming into our country. They agree with us that the boat should be stopped. They agree with us that raising the level at which people start to pay tax to £20,000 a year will help not just those on low pay, and it's a good idea. And boy, wouldn't that policy help Blackpool? With very low incomes for so many people. Very low incomes for too many people. But crucially, those on benefits are not all idlers that smoke dope all day. Some are. Some are. And we must deal with them. But many on benefits are genuine people who are trapped. They're trapped because if they go back to work more than 16 hours a week, they lose their benefits, and they're worse off in work than they would be on benefits. That's wrong. It's wrong at every level. So our policy would incentivise people on benefits to get back to work. And that wouldn't just make them better off financially, it would make them better off psychologically as well. I'm very, very proud of that policy. And for those who are saying they'll vote Labour, many of them were Brexit voters. Are you really going to vote for secure... Oh, I nearly nodded off that, I'm sorry. I mean, God, isn't he boring? Crikey O'Reilly. But if you're... Stop giggling, it's a very serious political meeting, this. Are they really going to vote for a man who wanted to overturn the referendum result? Are they really going to vote for a man who, and this is crucial, when Labour launched their manifesto last week, there were 6 key objectives. Not one of them mentioned legal immigration. Not one of them mentioned the population explosion in this country. Not one of them mentioned the population crisis in this country. Not one of them mentioned the fact that no wonder there's a shortage of houses, because we need to build one new home every 2 minutes in our country just to cope with the levels of immigration into Britain. None of it mentioned. Stop the boats. He almost doesn't even want to talk about it. You can now vote Reform UK, and you can do so knowing that this is not a tight contest. You can do so if you make a decision as to who you think will provide the best opposition to Keir Starmer at the dispatch box in number 10 and out campaigning around the country. And I think people are beginning to get the message, because other polling now, out today, when people are asked, who do you think would provide the best opposition to a Labour government, now has me a country mile ahead of all the other party leaders. Thank you. And I have a track record of standing up and fighting. I have a track record of being virtually immune to criticism. I have a track record in the European Parliament of getting up again and again over the years and absolutely wrecking their day. I have a track record of fighting against authority when it's unfair to ordinary, decent, honest people. I didn't fight against the banks last year. I won't go on fighting against the banks just because they debanked me. I did it because it's happened to hundreds of thousands of people, to hundreds of thousands of businesses up and down the length of this country. I am completely unafraid of authority. I'm unafraid of criticism. I don't want to be popular in the political class. I don't want to go to their poxy Notting Hill dinner parties anyway. No. I'd rather be in the Armfield Club in Blackpool watching the football. I've got to say that was pretty full on in there earlier. I mean, goodness gracious me. So voting for us is now like an open shot on goal. Voting for us will make us the opposition voice, which is going to be so badly needed. This Labour government have nothing to say. Nothing to say on any major issue. This country, right now, I'm sad to say, that Britain is broken. It's broken. We are broken economically. Our productivity levels are now down below that of the French, which is incomprehensible. I mean, I didn't think the French worked after lunch, you know. Mind you, not that I'm against that, you know, but our GDP, they go on about GDP. GDP's up, vote Conservative. Well, of course GDP's up. GDP is the size of a national cake. If you increase the population by 750,000, don't be surprised that the cake's bigger. But here's the question. Is GDP per head, is wealth per head higher in Blackpool as a result of mass immigration? It has fallen for the last 6 consecutive quarters in a row. And what no one talks about, Starmer won't talk about it, certainly Rishi won't talk about it, is our national debt. Our national debt. I can see a fiscal and monetary hawk sitting over there. Our national debt has almost trebled since the Conservatives came to power in 2010. Oh, they say it's not our fault. We had to deal with COVID. Well, you didn't have to lock us down, did you? Time and time and time again. You didn't have to put people on furlough forever. It wasn't necessary. You didn't have to tell us you're going to take away freedoms that weren't even lost to people in World War II. To tell us we had to wear masks that were totally useless or be fined. That we had to vaccinate children who weren't even going to suffer any complications from COVID, apart from a few very exceptional cases. These arguments and excuses take us away from the fact, folks, we're skint. We are skint. Every single year, the government spends more than it earns. And we cannot go on living like this forever. We have to be frank. We have to be honest. If we don't cure this, then we really will see cuts, genuine cuts, to public services and all the things that we need to live our lives. But there's no imagination, there's no change of the economic model, and our belief is this. The two big parties are in an unholy alliance with big international business and the big banks, and that is all they care about. And what we care about are the 5.5 million men and women in Britain running their own businesses, acting as sole traders. They don't get sick pay or holiday or time off. They have VAT levels that are ludicrously low. Corporation tax charged on them went up by 30% last year. They're burdened by IR35 rules that make it so difficult for self-employed contractors to work as drivers or work for building companies. I don't think Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer even understand this. They don't get how government is actually driving down the incentive to go out, take a risk, and really have a go. And we believe the only way out of this mess, the way for us to get back to a balanced budget, the way for us to start paying back some of this debt, and by the way, that debt repayment is now £90 billion a year. That's the interest. And that is on a par with the education budget, which is ironic, because it's that generation that are going to have this millstone around their necks for the whole of their working lives. And no one is talking straight. No one is being honest about it. We believe the way out is to trust the hard work, to trust the entrepreneurship. We will only get out of this mess if the men and women of our country are freed from regulation, which was promised with Brexit and not delivered, freed from ridiculous levels at which VAT starts to be paid. We want a revolution in Britain of people setting up companies, becoming self-employed, going out, making themselves money, employing people, paying tax. Our vision is for a Britain where people work, where people are rewarded, and where we fight our way out of this debt. It will not happen relying on big business. It won't happen. Government gets in the way of people doing well on their own. Let people be free, they will make money, they will succeed. But above all with this election, I really believe this should be the immigration election. We can't talk about housing, as I have already mentioned, without talking about the exploding population. We can't talk about rents. I mean, so many young people now, over half their income is paid just to live somewhere, and probably somewhere pretty modest. Rents have risen by 20 to 25% across the entire country since 2021. It is a direct cause and effect. There are fewer places to rent, therefore the price go up. You can't look at NHS waiting lists. You can't look at access to GP services without understanding that the population explosion has put intolerable pressures on. You can't look at our infrastructure. You can't look at the traffic. The M6. As a southerner, I thought the M25 was bad, but you've got a nightmare. I mean, a nightmare down the road here. The population explosion is diminishing the quality of life of everybody in this country. It is making us poorer. It is unacceptable. And this says nothing about the quality of the vast majority of people that come. We've all got friends that have come here from all over the world. We're a very welcoming country. We just can't take million upon million upon million. It does not work. And those sheer numbers have led in some parts of the country, and I'm thinking perhaps in the northwest, of Blackburn, of Burnley. We could cross the Pennines and go to Leeds or Bradford. And you saw what I saw in the local elections this year. For the first time in our lives in England, people voting on sectarian lines. People voting purely on religious lines. Communities so separated and divided from the rest of us because we've allowed people to come in too fast, too quickly, in too big a numbers that it's been impossible to integrate those people in society. Now rival communities, living together in the same towns and cities, not terribly far away from where we are now. And that is not a great recipe for the future. It is a major problem that we're going to have to deal with and deal with responsibly. And young men, aged 18 to 24, a growing number of them, who literally loathe the values that we stand for. And what do we stand for? If you think about it, whether we're churchgoers or not, everything about our country, everything about our culture is based on Judeo-Christian values. Everything. Everything. Nobody else dares say this, but it's true, isn't it? Yes. Everything is based, in a sense, on the Ten Commandments. Yes. I'm in favour of most of them, you know. Might have broken one or two over the years, but everything is... These are the fundaments upon which our country was built. This is what matters. And our values are those values. Our values are those that the family matters, that community matters, that working with each other matters, that country matters. This is what Reform UK is. These are our values. These are our principles. And you're very welcome to come in from anywhere in the world, from any religion. If you share those values with us, we can live together happily and in peace. But our irresponsible politicians have led us down a road where this no longer works. And perhaps the most striking example of this is what is happening in the English Channel. Now, I went out into the English Channel. In fact, just as lockdown started, I thought I need an excuse to get out of the house. And the pubs were closed, so where could I go? So I went out in March, April and May of 2020 into the English Channel, and I filmed the small boats. You know, I literally got right up within yards of these boats and I filmed them. And I said, and I was putting it out on YouTube in those days, I said two things. I said, number one, you may as well put a sign on the White Cliffs of Dover saying everyone welcome, because we'd stopped deporting illegal immigrants. Do you know, in the last year of the Labour government, 2009-10, we deported 45,000 people. That is what we used to do. We used to say, if you want to come and live here, you do it legally. You want to come here illegally, we get rid of you. Because that makes sense, doesn't it, to everybody? To everybody. But I also said there were two big problems. One, mainstream media were not covering this story. The newspapers weren't covering it, the radio stations weren't covering it, the TV companies weren't covering it. And I think my actions, my repeated actions, embarrassed them, frankly, into going out and covering the story. But I also said, and I predicted, that this would become, and then I used a very naughty word, unforgivable word. A word for which I'll never be forgiven. I said, this will lead to an invasion. Well, I mean, you would have thought, you know, I'd advocated killing the firstborn, you know. But 4,000 boats and 127,000 people later, I think I was right to use the word invasion, because that is what it is. On Tuesday of this week, 882 people crossed the English Channel. 91% of those that cross are male. Nearly all of them are young, and here's the point. Here's the point. Many come directly from war zones, in which they may well have been severely brutalised, or may even have been brutal themselves, for all we know. Others come from places where terrorism is rife. Some come from countries in which gang culture is predominant over the rule of law. Most come from countries in which women are not even regarded as second-class citizens. And I have filmed, and it's up there on YouTube, as they reach the 12-mile territorial water line of the British coast, them throwing their iPhones and their passports into the channel, so it's much more difficult for us to identify whether they have criminal records in whatever country they may have come from. And you may be upset and annoyed that the bill for putting these people up in four-star hotels is £8 million a day. You may be upset that many of our seaside towns or even tourist towns inland, their summer seasons are ruined because the hotels are full of these young men. Those things may upset you. Those things may annoy you. But maybe, folks, you're not thinking about it the right way. Maybe what we should be doing is declaring this a national security emergency. And in the face of all of this, Rishi Sunak says, the planes are going to Rwanda. Every Home Secretary tells us we're going to stop the boats. No matter who it is, Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, and now the very inappropriately named James Cleverly. Look, you know, they're always abusive about me. All I'm doing is teasing them. I think it's okay. They all say we're going to stop them. Boris said he'd stop the boats. Big speech at Lydd Airport in Kent. Sunak's promised us planes will go in July. And do you remember he told us that people were now in detention who would go on those flights in July? I have a news update for you. Every single one of those young men, every single one, you know this already, so shut up or you'll ruin it. Every single one of those, I said shut up or you'll ruin it. Every single one of those young men that was placed in detention has now, through using the Human Rights Act, been released on bail, and I'm reliably informed most have absconded and disappeared. Unbelievable. And no planes are going to Rwanda, because the increasingly active European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg won't allow it, and this Conservative Prime Minister hasn't got the guts to deal with it. He says in a debate, we'll consider leaving if they don't let us send planes to Rwanda, which means he says to the Eurosceptic wing of the party, I'm with you, and to the Europhile globalist wing of the party, I'm with you as well. And it sums them up. They're split down the middle. They stand for literally nothing. They have no guts, they have no backbone, they have no integrity. Their honesty after this betting scandal is seriously called into question yet again. And as for Labour, nothing. Nothing. They're going to crack down on the criminal gangs. Well, folks, we've been cracking down on the criminal gangs that sell illegal drugs on the streets of Blackpool for decade after decade. Is it working? Is it hell? And a gang in midsummer trafficking people across the English Channel can make 2 to 3 million euros a week. When the rewards are that high, whatever you do to the gangs, you will not stop them. And we finish up with this issue of the Channel, perhaps summing up the choice we face at this election. The Conservatives deserve to lose, but Labour don't deserve to win. The boats symbolise all that is wrong and unfair. Because people who come here legally and go through the hoops and pay a fair amount of money to become British citizens, it's a bigger affront to them in some ways than it is to those of us that were born here. It's totally unfair. It's wrong that our taxes go to put them up in hotels. It's wrong that our streets will become less safe as a result. It's wrong that we face potential terrorism as a direct result of all of this. But it can be done. And a friend of mine, Tony Abbott, who was the Prime Minister of Australia just over a decade ago, faced the same problem. The boats were coming from Indonesia. In the end, he said, no one that comes to Australia via this route will ever be allowed to settle. And we can do that, but only if we cut the Gordian knot and leave the European Court of Human Rights. And then we say, anyone that comes via that route, whether it's in the back of a lorry, whether it's on a small dinghy, will never, ever, ever, ever be given status to remain in our country. We make that clear. And if that doesn't work, and it will work, if that doesn't work, we'll say to the French, the fact that your Navy, despite the fact we've given you 500 million quid to stop this, the fact that your Navy still escorts dinghies from 200 yards off the beach at Gravelines to our 12-mile line and then hands over the people to Border Force or the much abused RNLI, we say to the French, we won't accept this. The international law of the sea actually says if these people are in peril, they should go back to France. And French Navy, if you won't take them back to France, if necessary, we will take people back to France. Only I have the determination and the solution to stop the boats. It is unlikely that I'll be in Downing Street on July the 5th. But it's entirely possible that I can be leader of the opposition to a weak Labour government on July the 5th. And with that first big step for reforming UK, I will then, over the course of the next 5 years, build a mass movement of people in this country. And I believe we can hold meetings like this in every town in the country. People know Britain is broken. People know Britain needs reform. People know things have gone badly wrong. People know we need politicians with courage that will take radical surgery to a patient that is seriously ill. And I can't believe that I'm here, really. I mean, I'd given it all up. But I'm back, and I have more determination in me. I have more ambition in me than I've ever had at any point. And frankly, I have more contempt for our political class than I've ever had. And I mean contempt. They're careerists. Most of them think they're still playing games at the Oxford Union. Well, they're not, as our country begins to go down the drain. Now, you've turned up tonight in great numbers. As I said, we could literally have put 2,000 of you in. You got in quick. You filled this room. Now it's your turn. If you agree with what I've said tonight, that's great. If you disagree with what I said tonight, that's great as well. We believe in free speech. We believe in differences of opinion. And I wouldn't mind if someone heckled me. That's fine. Just don't throw milkshake in my face. Or, in the case of Barnsley, cement they threw at me. But because that's not acceptable, is it? That's not acceptable in any way, and it's not what those last living remnants that were there on the beaches of D-Day on the 6th of June 1944 fought for. They fought for us to have the right to agree to disagree. So they stood up for democracy. They stood up for their families. They stood up for their communities. They stood up for their countries. They didn't just agree, they did something. So if you're in this audience and you agree with what I've said, if you agree that I'm the only person that can give proper opposition at this moment in time to a very, very weak, so wishy-washy, Mr. U-turn, Remainer, globalist, I mean, I could go on forever. And if you also think that here in Blackpool, we've got a couple of great lads that are standing for us. Fighters, principled people, people who are absolutely at the heart of communities, because these guys are. I don't want you just to agree. I don't even want you just to vote for them. I want to ask you, are you prepared to do more? Are you prepared to help us? Raise your arm if you're prepared to do something, if you're prepared to help us. Well, a lot of you have. Now, I've made a promise to you for what I'm going to do over the course of the next 5 years. And you've just made a promise to me as to what you're going to do for the next 2 weeks and hopefully on. So please get involved. Register on our website. Help deliver some leaflets. Put up some posters. And if you want to, come and join us and be part of the revolt, a much-needed revolt against a failed political establishment. We are unashamedly patriotic. We tell it how it is. We believe we can bring radical change, better change to our country over the course of the next few years. And thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Yes, we can. Thank you, everybody. An incredibly warm reception from you, an accolade from you. So warm, I'm actually very moved by it. It says to me I'm doing the right thing. Now, I would like to be able, if I could, to stay. I'd like to meet you all. I'd like to do selfies with you all. I'd like to have a pint with each and every one of you. I really would. But you must understand, the pressures on my time are literally enormous. I'm living on 4.5 hours sleep every night. That's all right, I can manage. We've got 2 weeks to go, and I'm very fired up. But would you please allow me to go? I've got to go. I've got to get back. I've got to get back to Kent tonight. I've got to get back to Kent tonight because I'll be on the BBC One at 8 o'clock tomorrow night, being interviewed by Nick Robinson. So please allow me to leave. Love you all. Thank you so very much indeed. I'll see you again.